Hello and welcome to Universe United. This is the first in a conversation series that brings our community together from all around the world. We're here today to honor our beloved sister and friend, Cheslie Kryst, who was an incredible person and someone we all loved very, very much. And we're here to celebrate her and remember who she was and what she stood for, all those organizations that she was involved with, that she was so dedicated to making a difference in the lives of others. So we look to you, our audience, to join us on these conversations with experts as they help us understand the world a little better and help some of the organizations that Cheslie was involved with along the way. Let's all be here for one another and spread some of that light that Cheslie brought to every room that she walked into. I'm Paula Shugart, president of the Miss Universe organization, and I first met Cheslie Kryst in 2019, in May of 2019, when she became Miss USA. She was a great friend, and she had such an amazing spirit. She lit up any room that she went into. But as bright a light that she showed to all of us, we now know that she was struggling inside. So I'd like to start off by welcoming Dr. Alfiee Breland-Noble, who is a psychologist, mental health correspondent, and founder of the AAKOMA Project, a BIPOC mental health organization. And she is associated with the millennial-driven nonprofit Project Healthy Minds. We hope that this conversation helps our community on how to better handle depression if you or someone you love is struggling. So, Dr. Alfiee, welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I deeply appreciate everything that you all are doing in this space, and it's my pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you. I think just to start off, Cheslie touched so many lives, and we're all grieving, and trying to make sense of something that I don't think we can really make sense of. You know, everyone knows that Cheslie was such a bright spirit and such a happy, positive person all the time. But then we recently learned about something called high functioning depression. Can you explain what that means?
When people think about the term high functioning depression, what they're really thinking about is a person where when you look at them, outward appearances are that they might not be suffering or struggling with depression at all. But I think in Cheslie's case, what a lot of people saw was, just as you described, a bright, gorgeous, brilliant, beautiful young woman who couldn't possibly have been struggling with depression because she frequently had a smile on her face. She was engaged in a lot of activities. She was very successful, high achieving. And so it's hard for people to see people who look like that as struggling with something as significant as depression.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when you think, oh, someone's depressed, it means that it's hard for them to get out of bed, or it's hard for them to just really do anything at all, to engage. And that certainly wasn't Cheslie. So I guess it really does have many different ways of manifesting.
And for many diverse communities or anybody with a marginalized identity, it's really hard to express depression, because what does depression look like? Or to allow other people to see it. Because you look down, you look sad, you look, in many cases, people will say you look like a victim or a target. And I think for someone in her position, that's hard, right? Because that's not the image that you want other people to see. Yeah, it can be very much a struggle to have that battle internally and at the same time work to ensure that people outside of you and around you don't see it. And I wonder sometimes if that was some of her struggle as well.
I've talked to a lot of young women after this where they think, oh, if this can happen to someone just as amazing as Cheslie, how do I recognize it in myself?
I think in general, when we're thinking about ourselves or we're thinking about our loved ones, what we want to be paying attention to is significant and consistent, persistent changes in behavior over a period of time. The first thing it's important to do is recognize, what do I feel like when things are neutral? And then over a period of 2 weeks, you want to be paying attention to, how are they sleeping? How are they eating? How are they interacting with people? What is their mood like, generally speaking? And if you see significant changes in those kinds of behaviors, that's when you know it's time to pay attention and maybe seek some kind of support.
I've heard you talk about it just as far as self-care. It's hard to get into it, to make that initial investment to, okay, what do I need to do? Because people are kind of lost about what is the guy. You know how to work out, but you don't know how to do things for yourself.
I agree. So what I always tell people is start tiny. Don't start big because we set ourselves up for failure. Figure out what's something that you feel like you have the capacity to control and to do. Pick something free. Pick something that you can take anywhere with you. Things like deep breathing or mindfulness. Mindfulness is literally just being present. Say 2 times this week, I'm going to take 30 seconds out of my day and I'm just going to sit quietly and count my breaths, right? So as I breathe in, I'm counting. Then as I breathe out, I'm counting. If we can just start there with baby steps, it can be a lot easier to develop the habits that we need to practice things like self-care.
I've tried to really take that moment to breathe, and I didn't even realize I was functioning, but I was also depressed. And it was a moment that my initial reaction was, oh, I can't let anyone know this. I can't talk about this. And I finally did talk to a therapist, and it was really, really helpful. But I was kind of at a loss on how to find that help. And I realized that a lot of people don't know where to go, and they're embarrassed to talk about it.
Absolutely. So first, let me just say, I know you don't need me to say this, but I just feel compelled every time someone is open and shares their story. You help like so many thousands of people just by saying, I knew that I needed some support and I went and sought it out. So you're really probably giving people permission to know that it's okay. And then in terms of this, the question of how do I find help? So you literally could just start with Googling, right? Google is your friend. Psychotherapist or therapist database. That's what I tell a lot of people. For other folks, I say ask for recommendations. Ask your friends. Ask someone you trust.
And what are some of the common stressors for women, and particularly women of color, that I know you deal in this field?
There are a number of them. If I'm talking universally about women, sexism is a big one. There are all these pressures on women. I think about social media, and I think about there's sort of one way to look, and that standard is almost impossible for anybody to meet, even for the people who look like they meet that standard. There's a lot of work that goes into that. There are all these pressures about sort of figuring things out quickly, and they think they need to have a TED Talk or be a multimillionaire influencer by the time they're 22 or they failed. And so these pressures to succeed and what success looks like, what we teach young people success looks like, all of these things are really heavy pressures on our young people. And there's so many other societal issues. If you happen to have a marginalized identity, what if you're LGBTQ? So those are some of the issues I would say that particularly impact women in this day and age.
I think it sort of segues into, obviously in the pageant world, people don't realize that we really talk a lot about confidence building and being comfortable with who you are. I talked to some title holders last week while we were trying to work through all of this, and they talked about social media, that they're not prepared when they win their state title or when they're competing, that the social media, what they're going into. And I know that hits every young person because it's a social media life. And are there any tools to deal with that?
People do a lot of scrutinizing, of the young people who are in the pageant world. And so I think part of it is going into anything with eyes wide open, talking to people and learning what are the pros and cons of moving in this space. Do we have a practice that builds us up in the early part of our day before we get really going in the day and get torn down by so many outside forces, right? I don't think anyone feels 100% confident in who they are 100% of the time. But I think it's particularly true, like I said, for the pageant world, where there's so much that is going to come at you that has to do with the core of who you are, what you look like, right? So if you're confident and you can build that confidence daily, it's not impossible for people to chip away at it, but it makes it a little bit harder for them to have the significant negative impacts that I think those kinds of things can have.
I really think there will always be trolls. There are trolls in all walks of life, not just for us, but I think I can't imagine being a young person in high school right now and having to deal with social media.
I'm gonna get real colloquial and use my slang. Haters gonna hate. That is their job. It is a troll's job to be a troll. Something I learned from watching Michelle Obama years ago was don't read the comments. You can have 100 wonderful, beautiful comments that say you are the greatest thing since sliced bread, and there'll be one comment that's negative or just mediocre, and that's what we zero in on. So if you stay out of the comments, that can help you. People will always talk. For some of these folks, that's their job. And to the extent that we can stay away from and avoid those kinds of negative comments, I think we protect ourselves and protect our mental health.
When you're strong and you do everything and you're in a good place that day, it's very easy, not easy, but it's easier to take that stand. It's when you're vulnerable and you're at a moment where you're down on yourself or you're feeling maybe not in a good place, that when you see those comments, because a lot of times you can say stay away, but sometimes you go there for validation, and it's when you're really, really down that a negative comment like that could be a trigger.
I agree with you. I think that it's not always simple. It's not always straightforward. And I think that those moments when we do feel down, that's when we want to seek the sources of validation that are secure for us. You have that one trusted friend. If you have that one source of social support, if you save affirmations or positive mantras on your device and you go look at those, right? There are many other ways that we can seek out that validation, particularly when we feel down. And I think the key is recognizing what are those strong sources if you have them, and if you don't have them, how can you develop and pull together some of those sources to support yourself so that you don't go seeking that validation in the wrong place?
For our community and those who knew Cheslie so well and knew her journey, how do you have any pointers on how to deal with her loss and how to get through the grieving process?
Two things. One is don't second guess yourself. Another way I phrase that is don't should on yourself, right? Don't do that, because it is not a useful activity, and I think often what it does is make you feel worse. The second thing I would say is that's really important, and I say this as a person who lost a parent when I was 8 months pregnant with my second child. It was really rough. I lost her to pancreatic cancer, and that is grieve in the way that you need to grieve. You're not on anybody else's timetable. There's not a certain way to grieve. If it takes you a long time to cry and let the emotions out, that's okay. If you're crying every 5 minutes and it's hard for you to stop crying, that is okay. But this idea that there's a certain way to grieve and there's a certain thing that you have to do, especially when I think about social media, this idea that if you haven't posted a photo, right, or you haven't written a long tribute, then you haven't grieved and you don't miss the person. None of that's true.
What is your approach when you want to raise awareness about suicide prevention?
So what I share with people is go to trusted resources. One of the ways I get the word out and raise consciousness is through social media, right? We can use social media for good. Find people to follow who are giving you good, useful, helpful information. I have a nonprofit that you mentioned, the AAKOMA Project, our website, AAKOMAproject.org, Project Healthy Minds. One of our partners and the group that I really love dearly, they have a lot of resources on their page. Some of the biggies that everyone's heard of, Mental Health America, National Alliance on the Mentally Ill, go to those resources. You know, if you don't want to go on a tired website, you want something more dynamic, follow them on socials, right? That's where you're going to get good information. There are many things we can be, but one of the best things we can be that's free, that doesn't cost us a lot, is to be kind to others. And I think most importantly is to be kind to ourselves.
Well, that's a perfect place to end this conversation. I think I thank you so much for making the time, and it's really helpful. And I am sure you're going to be connecting with someone out there, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.